There's a lot of promise about Ukraine in NATO. There's a lot of promise about Ukraine in the EU. But pragmatically speaking, that's going to be a long-term commitment. And Ukraine has a lot of things it has to adjust before it's ready to join either organization, realistically speaking, let alone NATO and the Trump effect. Do you disagree with that sentiment, or do you think Ukraine could be fast-tracked?
Whatever the timeline is for joining the European Union or whatever the timeline is for NATO, Ukraine's never going to stop. But once the opposition will melt away, once Russia is defeated, once Vladimir Putin is dead or in jail. This war will only end with Putin dying or being arrested. And once he is, Russia's going to have to reorientate. The mafia state's going to reshuffle their command structure, and they're not going to get sanctions relief. They're not going to get normalized relations until they give up their opposition.
This is The Global Gambit.
How are you going, everybody? We are back with another conversation, a podcast, which we do, but I've been doing more of my own things just because of the rate at which things are unfolding. But someone who's been a long-standing friend of the channel and come on multiple times at this point is Jake Bro, who runs, Jake Bro channel, I guess I could say that. And, delighted to have him back. I think we had you in earlier 2025 or end of 24. I can't remember, Jake. But before we even got on camera, I can tell that you are exasperated or just fed up with the whole situation at the moment. I know you do a lot of appearances on other shows and things, but you don't seem to get any more fed up with the fact that the peace talks aren't going anywhere. We've had this amazing Spiderweb operation. All that and more we're going to cover in this conversation. So, I mean, I'm just going to throw the floor to you, and where do you want to start? How do you feel at the moment? Because we check in every so often, and it's just crazy.
Well, this week has been especially good for Ukraine. The successful strike on the Crimean Bridge plus Operation Spiderweb, both of these Ukrainian intelligence operations, they took a year and a half to plan, and we're seeing the results. This at the same time disrupting what Russia wants to do with their massive drone and missile attacks. So the speculation is that all of these planes were parked outside and fueled up for something called Operation Zeus's Lightning, and Putin and the Russians were planning the largest ever cruise missile attack against Ukraine the day before the June 1st Istanbul talks to get Ukraine to capitulate to their demands. And just last week was good in that I think Ukraine dominated the headlines, got the world's attention, and is moving the needle on other political issues. But in general, the last 3 or 4 weeks with Russia's delay tactics, the Russians not taking the peace talks seriously, the Russians refusing to agree to a ceasefire, and then, of course, Donald Trump playing dumb or being dumb every step of the way. For people actually paying attention to the news every single day, yeah, I'm a bit jaded a little bit just with the headlines and having to read these stories and knowing what is going to happen, but just having to talk about it and play dumb and move along with it. It just day to day, Pyotr. Most people don't want to pay attention day to day because it doesn't make any sense. All of these people in charge of the United States and in charge of Russia are idiots, and they're corrupt. And I don't know. We'll get into the specifics, I guess. But yeah, that's why I had the tone with you when I logged on of, yeah, I guess we're doing an interview. We're going to talk about a bunch of stupid people doing some stupid stuff. I wish we could smile and laugh, just make fun of them. But this is a war, and people are dying, people are suffering, and we got to find a way to make this war stop.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest challenges is when you're running a geopolitical channel or a war commentary channel, it's very difficult trying to find levity in something so serious. But the Russians don't half make that easier for us, I think, in their incompetence. And, in the time that we've known each other, I've seen you evolve, I think, as someone. You've gone from being sitting on it in a certain way to now you're a lot more blunt in your opinions. And I think the Trump effect is certainly part of that. And so I guess that sort of makes me question, how do you think Trump might have felt about Operation Spiderweb, very specifically? Because there's a debate at the moment, and I was curious for your thoughts on, did he know or did he not? And if so, did he green light it?
Oh, of course he did not know. Nobody in the Ukrainian government is telling anything sensitive to anybody in the American government, because you can't trust the people in the American government. Based on people that Trump has appointed to key positions, they love Russia. RFK Jr. loves Russia. Tulsi Gabbard loves Russia. I'm not saying they're Russian agents or they're working for the Russians, but there is this political camaraderie, this ideological, overlap between what the Russians think and feel and what MAGA thinks and feel, which is why they want to be natural allies when in reality they're not. Russia is not the ally of the United States and never will be the ally of the United States in its current form. America's allies are the G7, NATO, the European Union, other democratic capitalist countries, and those are the people. This was never going to work. When Trump came into office, this was never going to work. Him trying to turn the G7 into our adversaries, to ally us with the Russians against the Chinese. Like, the dumbest people imaginable are in charge of my government, and I just have to live through this every single day. So yeah, I'm a bit jaded, bit flustered. So Operation Spiderweb, Trump is impressed. First of all, nobody's briefing him, or he doesn't go to his briefs. So he finds out about this stuff when he watches Fox News or scrolls on Truth Social. But yeah, both the attack on the Crimean Bridge plus Operation Spiderweb, Trump is not, he's not putting out the Zelensky stop tweets. Don't be so cruel to my BFF Putin. But Trump knows that Russia's not going to stop this war, and he's letting things go in motion to punish the Russians. And Trump's just trying to stay out of it, honestly, at the moment, this week especially.
Well, the last time he really made such an, explicit reference was that he basically, quote unquote, called Putin nuts. He's mad for the strikes that he was doing against Ukraine. And now we've seen, obviously, these events on the Ukrainian side. Do you think that he is beginning to make a calculated for Trump or whatever, that he's beginning to think maybe, Putin can't be trusted. Maybe I should put more of my backing behind Ukraine, or he wants to just give up on the whole thing and pull America out completely? Because that's my sentiment. I think he just wants to give up on the talks and leave the two to go at it.
I read the comments. I know people want to believe that Trump actually is Agent Krasnov, recruited by the KGB in 1987, and he has been secretly working for the Russians the last 40 years. And no, I don't think Trump is actually smart enough to do that, be an undercover agent. Trump just genuinely likes the Russians. He likes the mafia state culture. He likes the corruption. He respects Putin, that Putin has stayed in office for 26 years, killing and imprisoning all of his rivals, stealing all the wealth of Russia. Like, Trump is genuinely in awe of what this man has accomplished the last 26 years. And he wants to be friends with him. He wants that social proof of, we're bros, man. We're cool. We're friends. Mm. But Putin is not doing what Trump wants. And what Trump wanted when he got into office, I actually believe this now, Trump thought he could stop the war by just giving as many favorable terms and concessions to the Russians as possible. Trump was willing to allow Russia to keep all the territory they've taken so far. He was going to recognize Crimea as belonging to Russia. He was going to lift all sanctions, return all frozen assets, promise Ukraine would remain neutral and not a NATO state forever. Like, this would be a very bad peace deal for Ukraine. The only thing the Russians had to do was stop killing people and stop going for more. And Putin told Witkoff and told Trump, no, I'm not going to stop this war. I'm not going to stop killing people. I want the old territorial borders of the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. We're going to create a union state between Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia. This is what the State Duma members are saying. But they're also speaking about the natural borders of Russia, which would include going out to the Baltic Sea, including the Baltic states, as well as the Carpathian Mountains, which include Moldova. Russia already de facto controls the government and territory of Georgia. So yeah, this is the old empire. What Trump wanted was for Putin to stop the war, get together, have a grand summit in Riyadh or whatever, say this war was all this. Trump wanted Putin to have a meeting and to say this war was all Joe Biden's fault and he was going to stop it. And Trump is the reason why he stopped. And then Trump gets his Nobel Peace Prize. Barack Obama got one in 2009, 2010. That has always bugged Trump, that Obama has a Nobel Peace Prize and he does not. Like, this is so cartoonishly stupid, how vain and simple he is in the way he thinks and feels. But that's what he wanted. Putin didn't cooperate. He's given them 4 or 5 months to get on Trump's plan of what he wanted. And now we're seeing the results. Trump is not protecting Russia. Trump is going to allow congressional Republicans to pass sanctions or hand over frozen assets or sell military equipment to the Europeans so that they can just continue arming Ukraine. And that's where we currently are.
But to put it on its head, though, I mean, I've had, a part of me always wanted to retain a little bit of perhaps optimistic hope that Trump was more in tune with things. His appointment of Keith Kellogg all those months ago, I was like, oh, maybe there's a chance here. But no, his illustration of where he really sits and approaches this matter has been made, I think, quite clear. But to put it on its head, you're talking about the potential for sort of boosting funding to the Europeans. But obviously, at the same time as Operation Spiderweb, we had the Polish election results for the president, and the nationalist has won. And I don't know too much about his background. I will be doing a video on it soon enough. But what's your perspective of this sort of nationalistic rise? We also had the Romanian events, which was obviously a positive outcome. But do you not think there is a bit of a concern amongst parts of Europe for this Trump effect and growth of candidates who are Trump-esque?
All of these far-right national movements that have been gaining percentages in elections, or they've been outright winning seats, it all has to do with immigration. The European continent has been letting in millions of refugees and immigrants, most of them being from Africa and the Middle East. And all of these right-wing parties, they're winning on this issue of, well, if we don't stop immigration, if we don't stop these refugees, then we're no longer Poland, we're no longer Germany, we're no longer France. And I understand that, but we're just not having an honest debates. we're not understanding why does the deep state, or why do center and left parties approve of massive immigration to Europe? And it's because Europe's not having kids. When you look at the population demographics of these countries, they need immigration just to have zero population growth. I was looking at statistics from Ukraine, like just their population pyramid, and going back to 1991, 1992, Ukraine had over 50 million people. If you want to include Donetsk and Luhansk, going back to February of 2022, Ukraine was below 44, and now it's below 40. But it's all of these European countries. People back in the 70s and 80s just stopped having kids, and the birth rate has fallen so low. So for globalists, if that's what you want to call them, they've seized on the opportunity of the Arab Spring, which started in 2012, 2014, with all these Middle Eastern countries. They're dictators, Gaddafi and Mubarak, who had been in power for 40, 50 years or whatever. These Middle Eastern regimes all collapsed. We didn't get really a great, democratic revolution in the Middle East, but now all these refugees are coming to Europe and claiming asylum and looking for jobs. But usually the first generation doesn't really assimilate. You usually have to wait until the second or third before they become culturally French, culturally German, culturally Polish. And this just isn't the time scale that people want, wait 30 years for cultural assimilation. But in America, we're very comfortable with it. In America for 200 years, it's wave after wave of immigrants. And I understand it, but Donald Trump's the exact same thing. He's a right-wing populist who said, I'm going to seal the border and I'm going to deport 10 million people, and everyone who's illegal, they've got to go. That was a winning formula that got him elected, with other issues. But there's no solution here, Pyotr. Am I concerned about the election in Poland? And no, I'm not. I think for a lot of these politicians, and I think the prime minister or president of Italy is a good example. She was a right-wing populist that also was elected, but as soon as she got into office, she didn't really do anything crazy or extreme, and she still ended up being a supporter of Ukraine, because there's no reason to be on Russia's side unless you're taking Russia's money. Fico in Slovakia, Orban in Hungary, they are taking Russian money. They're part of the oil and gas contracts supplied by the Russians. They can skim money off the top. They get kickbacks. They have ownership stake in these energy companies that work with the Russians. So they're all compromised. Is the new president of Poland somehow taking money from the Russians and, through legitimate business or whatever? And no, I don't think he is. So I'm not too concerned that he's going to be. People, once they actually get into office, have a way of changing once they understand why the system exists the way it does. And the European Union has been very beneficial to Poland. When you actually look in taxes in versus benefits received, Poland is like the country that has benefited the most from being a European member as far as transferring tax revenue from one area of the EU to the other.
Yeah. No, I mean, demographics is what I studied for much of my undergrad, and the European Union has been a huge beneficiary from migration. There's no question that there is issues at the moment, and I personally want stronger policies. But, to say that sort of you can somehow replace migrants or whatever is beyond the pale. And indeed, Poland has been the biggest net beneficiary as well. They've surpassed. I think their economy was half the size of Sweden's prior to joining, and now it's overtaken, and it's 1.5 times the size. It's 900 million or something. Sweden's about 650 million. So it's like, yeah, the impacts of the EU and migration and all that have really come to speed. But on the
But we're not addressing the underlying issue of why aren't people in Western liberal democracies having kids anymore? And my theory, my answer is cost of living. If it's expensive for healthcare and especially here in the United States, but if it's expensive for childcare, if it's expensive for good schooling, if you don't have a good local school, like I don't think, especially Gen Zers, the people who are supposed to be having babies now, they are so nihilistic. They are so detached. They can't even imagine being in a long-term stable relationship and choosing to have kids. Like everyone, I feel like, who is young having kids, it's just a mistake, and they have to live with it now. Like culturally, we are not addressing the crisis amongst young people. I don't know if you consider yourself a millennial. I'm a millennial. But for people 20 years younger than us, they have no hope in the future.
Yeah.
And our political leaders are doing nothing to address this crisis. They don't even know about it. They're so distracted by all the other crises they're ignoring.
Well, we've got climate change is the single biggest threat, but depopulation is the one that we don't think enough about. Cost of living, I would say, and without going too much off, because I know people are here to listen to one thing, but I think this is worth covering for a second because it adds into the Ukrainian-Russian element, which is population decline or a loss of an entire generation between the two because of the war. Cost of living, I think, has been there for the past few years, especially since COVID. But you've also got to consider the introduction of women in the workforce, the role of tech and the emergence of the internet. All these things have really, shall we say, almost desensitized us to the role of family planning and the need for societal values. Religion has decreased. As you said, when migrants move over, second, third gen become less and less like their original parents and more acclimatized to the country. So they, I don't know, we can see that in the UK. We've got migrants from India, Bangladesh. They usually have children later and less of them. So all of these things contribute to a reduction in the demographics of a country. But the more multicultural the country is, like the United States or Britain, the higher the TFR or total fertility rate is. So, if you look at countries in the East, and then we bring it back to Ukraine, right, there is such a low total fertility rate. In Hungary, in Romania, in Poland, these countries have 1.2, 1.4 children per woman, which means that at that rate, the population will decrease by 50% sort of, by the end of this decade kind of thing. It's crazy. So to frame my point as a question, though, to you, how well do you think that we can be placed to sort of manage these challenges? Ukraine as well. The population's around 40 million, 38 million if we include certain refugee statuses. How well do you think Ukraine is managing the longer term impacts?
Well, Ukraine is in survival mode. They're fighting off a genocide. So, they've lost 8 or 9 million people who have, mostly women and children, who have left the country to be a refugee somewhere in the EU, or, there's 200,000 Ukrainian refugees here in the United States. But that's not the immediate concern. The immediate concern is the Russians continuing to destroy cities and gobble up wheat fields in Donetsk. So in general, Pyotr, I know you want to focus on Ukraine. We'll talk about Ukraine, but you got me on this tangent of
No, I mean, if people like
demographics.
it, let's talk about it. If people like it, let's talk about it.
Human beings are social creatures. We need relationships with other human beings. I understand people want to believe that they can just close themselves off, live alone, and be peaceful and happy by themselves. But that's not 99% of people. We need community. We need connection. We need bonds and relations with other humans. And I just don't think we're getting it from social media and the internet. People believe they have friends, on Steam that they play Halo with, or people believe they have community with their followers on, Instagram or whatever. But these are empty calories. These are not real relationships. They don't give us the same satisfaction. We get the dopamine hits in our brains, but we're not actually forming real relationships with people anymore. When you look at the statistics of young people who don't date, or young people who have never been intimate, or have just given up, they still have fake online relationships with people, being catfished or playing Sims, and, they're married to somebody in the Sims game. Like, this is what our society has become. And people more and more are just living in the digital world and ignoring their real lives. And this is a crisis. This is a problem. Ukraine, going back to Ukraine, they just have to survive. Their future is integration with the European Union. Their future is probably immigration. If Ukraine can stabilize, get their independence from Russia, it's a big country with a lot of space and a lot of, I don't know what they could plan, but I do think Ukraine's future is as a nation state within the European Union, and their future is going to be tied to the EU once this war is over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As I said, I'm not pushing to just talk about Ukraine. If you want to have these tangible conversations as well, I just don't want to false advertise to people who tune in for something and then get something else. That's all. But yeah, there you go, guys. Jake, a man of many talents and expertises. But yeah, I agree. I think that the social media has its sort of role in that it does give people sort of a sense of security as well. But the over replacement, I think, that is happening. Your point about dating is stark. I mean, some of the data I've seen in the past is sort of how people used to meet partners, mainly through friends or maybe the office or just in the bar. I'm old school in that if I see someone who I find attractive, I'll just go and ask her out, because I think there's nothing wrong with that. It's how you do it, which is important. But when it comes to Ukraine, I mean, let's think about the overall integration there, because from my understanding, I don't know if it's changed since we last spoke, European leaders say one thing, but they don't always follow through with policy change. So there's a lot of promise about Ukraine in NATO. There's a lot of promise about Ukraine in the EU, but pragmatically speaking, that's going to be a long-term commitment. And Ukraine has a lot of things it has to adjust before it's ready to join either organization, realistically speaking, let alone NATO and the Trump effect. Do you disagree with that sentiment, or do you think Ukraine could be fast-tracked?
Whatever the timeline is for joining the European Union, or whatever the timeline is for NATO, Ukraine's never going to stop. But once the opposition will melt away, once Russia is defeated, once Vladimir Putin is dead or in jail, this war will only end with Putin dying or being arrested. And once he is, Russia's going to have to reorientate. It's, the mafia state's going to reshuffle their command structure, and they're not going to get sanctions relief. They're not going to get normalized relations until they give up their opposition to Ukraine being a free and independent nation capable of self-determination, which includes their right to join the European Union and NATO. Once whoever replaces Putin in the Kremlin takes that position, opposition from Viktor Orban or Fico or whoever will go away, and Ukraine will continue this path. Whether it takes 2 years, 4 years, 6 years to join these organizations, it doesn't matter. In the long term, Ukraine will get that security and it'll get that economic integration. I mean, the cleanup, the unraveling from this war is going to take decades for Ukraine, and they know that. There's going to be destroyed, ruined cities that tourists can go visit, on a weekend holiday for decades to come. So people will think about this war, remember this war, and never forget what Russia has done to all of Europe. This is Russia threatening everyone in Europe and their peace and security.
Yeah, I think what's quite interesting about what we've seen by the Europeans is there's been a flurry of activity, right? The coalition of the willing, the Brits hosting that, the French holding the European political community. There's a lot of acronyms, there's a lot of subgroups within the European Union, let alone NATO as well, right? So when you look at this from across the Atlantic, setting aside Trump's overarching role or not, presence there, right? Do you feel optimistic about Europe's capacity to support Ukraine on its own?
Well, you ask me that as an American, but what do Europeans think? And I just saw a poll this week that trust in the European Union by Europeans is at an 18-year high. And nothing brings people together like an external outside threat. And, Russia's been that threat for 3.5 years, but now Donald Trump is also a threat. Donald Trump saying that the European Union was only created to rip America off. Therefore, we're going to place 50% tariffs on the EU to put them in their place. Like, I don't know what the strategy is here, but the European Union, they need to cooperate. They have to work together. Otherwise, they're just not going to compete. For Hungarian nationalists, I'm sorry, but you're kind of irrelevant on the global stage. Like, Hungary is a landlocked country of a couple million people, and you don't really matter when you talk about the big boys, India, China, Russia, the United States, or whatever. So I as an American, I don't reflect too hard on it, but people in Europe are always like, why do you talk about what state you're from? Why do you say that, you're from Wisconsin? Who cares that you're from Wisconsin? You're American. And I'm like, the population of Wisconsin is bigger than Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia combined. Why is it okay for you to be proud of your country, which doesn't have a lot of people, when the state I'm from has more people? I don't know. It's silly, but this is just how people think. People think about the worlds they're from and the world they're living in, and everyone enlarges it in their own minds, their own self-importance. But to humble yourself, you have to think about the 7 billion people on this planet and how we've all divided ourselves. And we're all going to benefit greater if we find what we have in common and what we can cooperate on than for these stupid nationalist rivalries where we're just trying to have symbolic victories somehow that, our guy won Eurovision, or our sports team, won this hockey match, or we got the gold in this event. None of it really matters, but I'm hopeful that humanity long-term will find more in common than what separates us, and we can have peace on this planet.
Yeah, no. I mean, I had plans to go to Budapest for the summer, but I think the comment section will be rather aggrieved with your thoughts about Hungary there, Jake. So I guess I've got a little bit of conflict in my life now. I'm joking.
The fact that Orban wants this tiny slice of Ukraine that has like tens of thousands of ethnic Hungarians. There's like this little sliver on the Hungarian border in which people who speak Hungarian are living there. And Viktor Orban thought, I'm going to support Russia and I'm going to get more territory. Like, I'm going to get this chunk once the capital city of Kyiv falls. Like, that's how stupid these people are. You're from this tiny country that's landlocked, and you're talking about getting more territory when you're already in the European Union. Like, dictators just can't help themselves. It's so stupid.
What do you think, looking ahead, Russia's are in vis-a-vis, particularly I'm thinking China, if things are basically going to fail away with the Trump administration? What is Putin's calculus going to be?
Putin just wants to go back to the status quo of the 1950s and 60s, where there are competing superpowers in a multipolar world. Basically, Russia wants to be a respected and feared empire that the world has to take into consideration anytime they make a decision. Whether Brazil and South Africa want to make a trade deal with each other or whatever, they should be consulting the Russians before they make that trade deal, because Russia is a great superpower in the world.